Chapter 1. The night before. You are nothing without me. This apartment, this life, every comfort you wake up to, I built all of it. And tomorrow, when I walk into that boardroom and take this company's future into my hands, I want you to sit here and remember exactly what you contribute to this marriage. Because the answer, Audrey, is nothing. Grant Holloway said those words to his wife's face at 12 minutes past midnight. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. Grant had learned early in their marriage that volume was unnecessary when certainty did the work for you. And Grant Holloway was certain about everything, especially the things he was wrong about. Audrey stood beside the bedroom window in a robe she had bought with money Grant did not know existed. From a bank account Grant had never seen. Connected to a company Grant had never taken seriously enough to investigate. She stood very still. She did not cry. She did not argue. She looked at the man she had been married to for 14 years with an expression he would have recognized as dangerous if he had ever once in those 14 years been genuinely studying her face. He was not studying it now. He was already turning away, already reaching for the phone buzzing in his pocket, already moving toward his office door to call the woman who was waiting for him, the woman who would be sitting beside him in that boardroom tomorrow, wearing the dress he had picked out for her. "I have a call to make," he said without looking back. The office door clicked shut. Through it, Audrey could hear the low warmth of his voice change, soften, become the version of Grant Holloway that she had not been offered in years. The charming version. The version that leaned in and listened, and made you feel like the most important thing in his field of vision. She had been married to that version once. She remembered it the way you remember a city you visited when you were young, real but unreachable, belonging to someone you no longer. Subscribe and follow this story to the very end, and want to see how far this one travels. Audrey listened to the murmur of his voice for exactly 10 seconds. Then she walked down the hallway to the guest bedroom, the room she had quietly moved her things into 8 months ago. A migration Grant had not noticed, because noticing would have required the kind of sustained attention he had stopped paying her somewhere around year 4, and she sat down at the small desk in the corner and picked up her phone. She typed 4 words to her attorney. "Tomorrow we proceed. Confirmed." Kathleen Voss, senior partner at Voss and Haldane, replied in 11 seconds. Kathleen did not sleep before major transactions. She never had. Everything is in place. "See you on the other side, Audrey." Audrey set the phone down. She did not smile. She did not feel triumph. What she felt was harder and cleaner than triumph. The focused, absolute stillness of a woman who had spent 3 years building something so precise that the man walking into it tomorrow would not understand what had happened until every exit was already sealed. She opened her laptop and typed one final message to Leo Park, her executive assistant. Leo had been with her for 6 years. He understood what was at stake the way only someone who had been there from the beginning could understand it, completely, quietly, and without needing to be told twice. Leo. "I arrive at 9:15. Board packets stay sealed until I open them personally." And Leo, nobody tells him. Not one word. The reply came in 8 seconds. "Understood. Everything is ready, Miss Sinclair." Miss Sinclair. Not Mrs. Holloway. Not ever, professionally, Mrs. Holloway. Audrey had kept her name in every business context since the day she founded Sinclair Capital Group, and Grant had never questioned it, because Grant had never considered her professional identity to be something that required his attention. Sinclair Capital Group. Her little consulting thing. That was what he had called it 4 months ago at a dinner party hosted by one of his industry contacts. They had been standing in the living room, Grant, 3 colleagues, and Audrey, when someone asked Audrey what she did for work. Before she could answer, Grant had laughed, draped his arm around her shoulder in a gesture that looked affectionate from across the room but felt at close range like a hand pressing down, and said, "Audrey has a little consulting thing. Keeps her busy. Gives her something to do while I'm running the real operation." 3 people had smiled. One of them, Margot Duval, the operations director at Apex Meridian, had not smiled. Margot had looked at Audrey with the careful expression of a woman who recognizes when another woman is being made small in public and is filing that information away for future reference. Audrey had smiled. She had taken a sip of wine. She had said nothing. Because correcting Grant would have started a conversation she was not yet ready to finish, and Audrey Sinclair did not start conversations she could not finish. Her little consulting thing had closed a $32 million fund that month. She had not told him. She had stopped telling him about her work around year 5, when she realized that his responses, "That's great, babe," delivered without looking up from his phone, were not responses but reflexes. The verbal equivalent of a screensaver, running on the surface while nothing moved underneath. She had stopped telling him. He had stopped asking. And in the silence between those two surrenders, she had built an empire. Sinclair Capital Group now managed $412 million in assets. It employed 31 people across 2 offices. It had, over the past 18 months, quietly and meticulously acquired a controlling stake in Apex Meridian Holdings, the company where Grant Holloway had worked for 10 years. The company he believed was his kingdom. The company he was planning to impress tomorrow with a presentation built on numbers she already knew were fabricated. She knew because the acquisition gave her access to every document Apex Meridian had ever produced. She had reviewed Grant's presentation 3 days ago, line by line, number by number, source by source, and what she had found was exactly what she expected. A polished, confident, professionally delivered collection of projections that looked impressive on the surface and fell apart the moment you checked the math. She was going to check the math tomorrow, in front of everyone. Audrey closed her laptop. She looked at the hallway beyond her door, where Grant's voice still murmured in that warm, intimate register she no longer received. She was not jealous. She had moved past jealousy 16 months ago, when she had found the hotel receipt, carelessly left in a jacket pocket, because Grant had always been careless about the things he believed were beneath detection, and understood, in a single cold moment, that her marriage was not failing. It had already failed. The receipt was just the timestamp. She had grieved, briefly, privately, at this desk at 4:30 in the morning while the city slept. And then she had done what she always did when grief threatened to become paralysis. She went back to work. Now, 14 months later, the work was done. Tomorrow was simply the day the world would see it. She opened a drawer in the desk and removed a sealed envelope. Divorce papers. Prepared over 9 months. Reviewed by 3 attorneys. Structured with the precision of a woman who understood that the difference between justice and chaos was preparation. She held the envelope for a moment. Then she put it back, closed the drawer, and went to bed. She fell asleep at 1:47 in the morning. She would be awake again at 4:30. She always was. Down the hall, behind his office door, Grant ended his call and went to the master bedroom alone. He set his alarm for 5:45, lay down in the center of the king bed that he now occupied entirely by himself, and fell asleep with the absolute confidence of a man who has never once considered the possibility that the world might not be arranged for his benefit. 14 blocks away, Simone Avery hung up the phone, looked at the blue dress hanging on her closet door, and set her alarm for 5:30. She needed the extra 15 minutes. Not for makeup, not for logistics. She needed them to practice. She had been rehearsing what she would say if someone at the meeting asked about the Southeast Asia projections. The projections she had helped Grant build over 3 late evenings in his office. Smoothing numbers, rounding edges, making ugly data presentable. She had not thought of it as fabrication. She had thought of it as optimization. She had thought, this is how it works at this level. This is what he is teaching me. She went to bed in her apartment that smelled like takeout and ambition, and she dreamed about the corner office she believed was waiting for her at the end of this particular road. 3 people, 3 alarms, 1 boardroom. None of them knew what was coming, but only one of them had. Holloway woke at 5:45 with the immediate, unquestioning alertness of a man whose body had learned to rise before the city did. He did not hit snooze. He had never hit snooze. Snooze was for people who were uncertain about whether the day ahead of them was worth getting up for. And Grant had not experienced that particular uncertainty in over a decade. He showered in the master bathroom, heated floors, rainfall showerhead, imported tile that Claire had selected during the renovation. Though he had long since forgotten that detail and now considered the bathroom simply his. The way he considered most things in this apartment simply his. He dressed in the walk-in closet with the methodical precision of a man who understood that appearance was not vanity, but strategy. Navy suit, white shirt. The tie was silk, a deep burgundy that Audrey had given him on their 3rd anniversary, back when they still exchanged gifts that required thought. He did not remember who had given it to him. He just knew it looked right. He walked down the hallway toward the front door. He passed the guest bedroom. Audrey's door was closed, no light beneath it, and felt nothing about it. No curiosity, no concern, not even the mechanical acknowledgement of a person existing behind that door. She was simply part of the apartment's furniture now, a fixture he navigated around on his way to the parts of his life that mattered. His phone buzzed on the console table. A text from Simone. Ready when you are. Blue dress, as requested. He smiled, a real smile. The kind that creased the corners of his eyes in a way that made him look 10 years younger. The kind of smile he had not aimed at his wife in longer than either of them could honestly recall. He typed back, "Perfect. Car will be there in 20 minutes. Today is ours." He pocketed the phone, picked up his leather portfolio, and walked out of the apartment without once looking toward the hallway that led to his wife's room. He did not say goodbye. He never did anymore. In the guest bedroom, Audrey heard the front door close. She had been awake since 4:30, sitting at her desk with her laptop open to a document she had been refining for 3 weeks. The complete operational restructuring plan for Apex Meridian Holdings, built on real data, verified sources, and the kind of strategic vision that only comes from someone who has spent years studying a company's weaknesses from the outside, while its executives congratulated themselves on the inside. She closed the laptop when she heard the elevator chime down the hall. He was gone. She exhaled. Not with sadness. Sadness had been processed and discharged months ago, filed away in the archive of emotions that no longer served a functional purpose. What she felt now was cleaner. Focus. The specific, concentrated energy of a woman who had been operating on a 3-year timeline and was now standing at the end of it. She stood, walked to the closet, and selected the suit she had purchased 6 weeks ago for this specific morning. Charcoal gray, impeccably tailored, chosen not for beauty, but for authority. She had tried it on 3 times in the privacy of this room, studying herself in the mirror with the critical eye of a woman who understood that the first 30 seconds in a room determined how the next 3 hours would go. She pulled her hair back into a clean, precise knot. No loose strands, no softness. She put on minimal makeup, enough to look rested, not enough to look like she was trying. She checked her reflection once, nodded at it the way you nod at a colleague who has delivered satisfactory work, and picked up her phone. One new message from Leo. Board members confirmed, full attendance. Tate from legal has been in the building since 6 a.m. reviewing documents. He knows everything. He is prepared. Audrey typed back, good. Is Margot Duval attending? Leo replied, yes, front row. Audrey allowed herself a small, private moment of satisfaction at that. Margot Duval, the operations director who had watched Grant diminish Audrey at that dinner party 4 months ago, the woman who had not smiled when everyone else did. Margot was going to have a very interesting morning. She put on her shoes, low heels, chosen for the sound they made on marble, which was clean and deliberate and unhurried, and picked up her slim leather folio. Inside it, along with the restructuring plan and the sealed board packets, was the envelope from the desk drawer, the divorce papers. She would not need them until after the meeting, but she wanted them close, not as a weapon. As a period at the end of a sentence she had been writing for 3 years. She walked out of the guest bedroom, through the apartment she owned, past the kitchen counter where Grant's coffee cup sat unwashed, because Grant had never once in 14 years of marriage washed his own coffee cup, and out the front door. The elevator took her down 47 floors. A car was waiting. She got in and said one word to the driver, Sterling. 14 blocks away, Simone Avery was standing in front of her bathroom mirror in the blue dress, turning slightly left and right, evaluating herself with the particular critical attention of a woman who has learned to see herself through someone else's eyes and has not yet realized that this is not the same thing as seeing herself clearly. The dress fit well. It was the right shade of blue. Not too bright, not too dark. The kind of blue that said, I belong here, without saying it too loudly. She had paired it with heels that added 3 inches, and a necklace she had bought herself after her first full year at Apex Meridian. A small gold pendant that she touched now, briefly, the way you touch a talisman before walking into a room you are not entirely sure you deserve to be in. She deserved to be in the room. She knew that. She had done the work. She had spent 3 years learning the landscape of Apex Meridian's operations, building relationships with senior staff, producing analysis that Grant regularly praised and regularly took credit for. She knew the Southeast Asia data better than anyone on the team, because she had been the one who pulled it, organized it, and restructured it into the clean, persuasive format that Grant would present today as his own. The restructuring part was where things got complicated. 3 weeks ago, on the second of their 3 late evening working sessions, Simone had pulled up the exchange rate data for the Vietnamese dong and noticed that the Q4 figures showed a significant drop from Q3. She had mentioned it to Grant. The dong conversion is off, she had said, pointing at her screen. If we use current rates, the entry cost goes up by almost $7 million. That changes the whole ROI timeline. Grant had leaned back in his chair, looked at the ceiling in that way he did when he was about to say something he wanted her to accept without questioning, and said, use Q3. But Q3 is outdated. The board will, Simone. He had said her name the way you say the name of a child who is being corrected gently. The board doesn't check exchange rates. They look at the bottom line. If the bottom line says 42 million, they say yes. If it says 49, they hesitate. Hesitation kills deals. Use Q3. She had used Q3. She had told herself, this is how it works at the highest level. This is what experience looks like. He knows things I don't know yet. Now, standing in her bathroom on the morning of the presentation, touching her pendant, smoothing the blue dress, she felt a flicker of something she chose not to examine too closely. Not doubt exactly. Doubt would have required her to question the entire structure of her professional relationship with Grant, and she was not prepared to do that. Not today. Not when everything she had been building toward was about to happen. She picked up her bag, checked her phone one more time, and headed for the door. In the car on the way to Sterling Tower, she thought about something else. Something from 2 months ago that she had filed away without fully processing. She had been at Grant's desk, pulling files from his computer for a joint review, when a document folder caught her eye. It was labeled Estate Sinclair Trust. She had clicked on it out of reflex, the way you click on something when your hand is already moving before your judgment catches up. Inside was a single PDF, a trust document. The name at the top was C. Sinclair. The asset value listed was a number large enough that Simone had blinked, closed the folder, and turned to Grant. What's the Sinclair Trust? She had asked, keeping her voice casual. Grant had barely looked up. That's Audrey's thing. Old family money. Some trust from before we got married. Doesn't touch anything real. Simone had nodded. She had accepted the explanation the way she accepted most of Grant's explanations, quickly, without follow-up. Because follow-up questions led to conversations that reminded her she was having an affair with a married man. And those conversations made the architecture of her daily life feel less stable than she needed it to feel. She had not looked at the document again. She had not Googled C. Sinclair. She had not done any of the things that her training in financial analysis would have naturally prompted her to do. Because doing those things would have meant knowing something she had decided, at a level beneath conscious thought, that she did not want to know. The car pulled up to Sterling Tower. Simone checked her reflection one final time in her phone's camera, smoothed the blue dress, and stepped out into the Chicago morning. Grant was already inside, waiting for her by the elevator bank on the ground floor. "You look perfect," he said. She smiled. "Ready when you are." They rode the elevator together to the 41st floor, and Grant put his hand on the small of her back in a gesture that was proprietary rather than affectionate, though Simone had not yet learned to tell the difference. Before the fall. The conference room on the 41st floor of Sterling Tower had been rearranged. Grant noticed it the moment he walked in, the way a man notices when someone has moved the furniture in a room he considers his own territory. He had presented in this room dozens of times over 10 years. He knew its geography the way a surgeon knows an operating table, every angle, every sight line, every strategic position mapped and internalized. But someone had changed it. The long presentation table had been repositioned so that the primary seat, the power seat, the one with its back to the window and a direct line of sight to every face in the room, was now clearly designated for someone specific. A simple white card sat at that seat. No name printed on it. Just a blank placeholder. Grant paused for 1 second. Then he pulled out his own chair, third from the left, where he always sat, and set his portfolio down with the practiced ease of a man who refused to let furniture make him feel anything. "Somebody rearranged the room," he said to no one in particular. Nathan Perry was already there. Nathan was Grant's deputy, a careful man in his mid-30s who had the perpetual expression of someone bracing for impact. He was standing near the window with a tablet in his hands, shifting his weight from one foot to the other in a way that Grant had seen before and always found irritating. "Morning, Nathan. You look like you're about to deliver bad news at a funeral." Nathan tried to smile and did not quite succeed. "There's been a lot of unusual activity this morning. Legal's been in emergency session since 6. Richard Tate pulled 3 staff members into a closed-door meeting an hour ago, and nobody's come out." "Legal is always in emergency sessions," Grant said. "That's what legal does. It panics so the rest of us don't have to." "This feels different." "It always feels different to you, Nathan. Relax. Get some coffee. Stop vibrating." Nathan opened his mouth, closed it, and walked away with the resigned posture of a man who has tried to deliver a warning and been dismissed, and who now has nothing left to do but wait for the thing he warned about to arrive on its own. Simone had settled into the chair beside Grant's. She was arranging her notepad, her pen, the small details that made her feel prepared. But she was looking around the room with an expression Grant did not notice. An expression that was not quite anxiety, but was something adjacent to it. A heightened awareness, the same instinct that had made her pause at the Sinclair Trust document 2 months ago. Something about this morning felt off-center. She could not have articulated what, exactly. The rearranged room, the emergency legal sessions, the fact that after 3 months of ownership, nobody at Apex Meridian had been told the name of the new CEO. These were data points, and Simone was trained to notice data points even when she chose not to act on them. "Grant," she said quietly. "The new CEO. Nobody has seen them. Nobody knows their name. Don't you think that's strategic?" He did not look up from his phone. "You build anticipation, then you deliver. Standard executive playbook." "Whose playbook?" He glanced at her with the particular half-smile he used when he found a question endearing rather than relevant. Mine. The board members were arriving. Grant watched them enter and felt the familiar territorial satisfaction of a man surveying his domain. Harper Reynolds from finance, efficient, sharp, already taking notes before the meeting started. Margot Duval from operations, steady, composed, watching the room with that careful expression she always wore. Richard Tate from legal, who walked in last, sat down and looked at his phone with an expression Grant had never seen on his face before. Something between awe and extreme caution. The expression of a man holding information he is not yet permitted to release. 3 members of the acquisitions board were present, which was unusual. They did not normally attend internal presentations. Their presence meant someone had specifically requested their attendance, which meant someone with authority over the board had decided this meeting was more than a routine strategy session. Grant filed this under good sign. The more senior the audience, the better his presentation would land. The more people in the room when he delivered the Southeast Asia projections, the more clearly the new CEO would understand that Grant Holloway was not a man you replaced. He was a man you promoted. Full house, Simone murmured beside him. That's the point, Grant said. He straightened his jacket. When they meet whoever this new person is, the first thing they're going to see is the best presentation this company has heard in 3 years. That's me, Simone. That's what today is about. She reached over and adjusted his pocket square, a gesture she had performed dozens of times. A gesture that, in the economy of their relationship, served as both intimacy and submission. Her hands making him look better, her attention directed at his presentation of himself rather than her own. He let her. Simone pulled her hand back and glanced across the room at Margot Duval. Margot was watching them. Not with judgment, not with curiosity, with the flat, observational attention of a woman who sees a dynamic clearly and is simply recording it. Simone looked away. She thought, without wanting to, about the one time she had met Audrey. It had been 7 months ago, at an industry holiday reception. Grant had brought Simone as his guest. A decision he had explained as networking exposure for junior staff, which was technically defensible and practically transparent to anyone paying attention. Audrey had attended separately, arriving late, wearing a simple black dress and no jewelry except her wedding ring. Grant had introduced them. Audrey, this is Simone. She's on my team. Simone, my wife. Audrey had extended her hand. It's nice to meet you, Simone. Her grip had been firm, her eyes had been direct, and her expression had been, what? Simone had spent months trying to categorize it. Not hostile, not suspicious, not even particularly interested, just present. A woman looking at another woman and seeing her with the kind of clarity that made Simone, for one uncomfortable moment, feel entirely transparent. Nice to meet you too, Mrs. Holloway. Sinclair, actually. Professionally. But please, just Audrey is fine. The conversation had lasted less than 2 minutes. Audrey had been polite, asked Simone about her work, nodded at the answers, and then excused herself to speak with someone across the room. Nothing dramatic. Nothing confrontational. Nothing that should have lodged in Simone's memory with the particular weight it had. But it had, because in that brief exchange, standing in her carefully chosen cocktail dress next to the married man she was sleeping with, looking at his wife's short practical nails and simple clothes and complete absence of effort to impress, Simone had felt something she did not want to feel. She had felt small. Not because Audrey had made her feel small. Audrey had done nothing but be pleasant. It was the specific smallness of a woman who is standing in a room with a man's wife and knows, in the part of herself she has learned to keep very quiet, that the story she has been telling about her own situation is not the one other people would tell about it. She had pushed that feeling down. She was good at pushing feelings down. She had been doing it for 3 years. Now, in the conference room on the 41st floor, sitting beside Grant with her notepad ready and her blue dress perfect, and the morning sun casting long rectangles of light across the polished table, Simone pushed it down one more time. There was no reason to think about Audrey today. Today was about the presentation. Today was about the future. Grant stood up. "All right," he said to the room, with the easy command of a man who believed the air in every room he entered was primarily for his use. "I know we're all waiting for the big reveal. Let's not waste a moment." He walked to the front of the room. He pulled up his slides. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the faces gathered around the table, his colleagues, his board members, his deputy, his mistress, and felt the particular surge of certainty that had carried him through a decade of executive meetings in this building. This was his room, his terrain, his moment. He began to speak. And for 11 minutes, Grant Holloway was the best version of himself. Those 11 minutes would later feel to everyone who witnessed what came after, like watching a man build a sandcastle with his back to the tide. Beautiful work. Impressive engineering. Every detail attended to, every angle considered. And behind him, silent and enormous and absolutely inevitable, the wave was already rising. He was genuinely good. That was the complicated truth that everyone in that room would struggle with afterward. Grant Holloway, for all his failures as a husband, as a man, as someone worthy of the trust people had placed in him, he could hold a room. His voice carried authority. His slides were polished. His data, fabricated as portions of it were, was presented with the fluency of a man who had internalized every number and could deploy any of them in response to any question. He talked about market expansion into Southeast Asia. He talked about restructuring the media division. He quoted the $42 million entry cost for Vietnam with the confidence of a man who had no idea that the woman who would walk through that door in approximately 90 seconds already knew the real number was 49. Simone watched him from her chair. She watched the room respond to him. The small nods, the note-taking, the particular quality of attention that a confident speaker generates in an audience that wants to believe what it is hearing. She felt proud. She felt, in that specific moment, like the investment she had made was about to pay off. She wrote on her notepad, "Strong opening. Board is engaged. SE Asia numbers landing well." She underlined, "landing well." And then Richard Tate, the general counsel, stood up quietly from his chair at the far end of the table. He did not interrupt. He did not raise his hand. He simply stood, the way a man stands when something he has been waiting for has finally arrived, and said two words that changed the pressure in the room, the way a door opening changes the pressure in a sealed space. "She's here." The room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. Something collective and involuntary. A held breath releasing, from anticipation into arrival. Grant stopped mid-sentence. He turned toward the door. He heard the heels first. The sound was deliberate, not hurried, not hesitant, each step measured and clean, the acoustic of authority moving through marble hallways. Everyone in the room turned toward the door. Grant stood at the front with his hand frozen on the presentation remote, his expression caught halfway between irritation at the interruption and the performative warmth he had prepared for meeting whoever was about to walk in. He had practiced this moment. The handshake, the deference that was not quite deference, the greeting that established respect while subtly communicating that this was his room, his presentation, his kingdom that the new CEO was simply visiting. The footsteps stopped. The door opened. Audrey Sinclair walked into the conference room. She wore the charcoal suit. Her hair was pulled back. She carried a slim leather portfolio and nothing else. No coffee, no phone in hand, no accessories of casualness. She moved with the economy of a woman who understood that everything she did in the next 30 seconds would establish the terms of every interaction that followed. The board members stood, not slowly, not reluctantly, immediately, with the involuntary precision of people responding to the presence of authority they recognize, even before they consciously process it. Harper Reynolds stood. Richard Tate stood. Margot Duval stood with an expression on her face that was not surprise, but something more complex: recognition, vindication, and a small, sharp satisfaction that she kept entirely internal. Nathan Perry stood so quickly. His chair scraped the floor. Simone stood because everyone else was standing, her body following the room's choreography before her mind had finished processing what was happening. Grant did not stand. Grant was staring. Not at a stranger. At his wife. Audrey walked to the head of the table, to the seat with the blank white card, the seat that had been waiting for her since the room was rearranged at 7:30 that morning, on her specific instructions. She set her portfolio down. She did not sit. She looked at the faces around the table with the same clear, direct attention she had used at that holiday party 7 months ago when she met Simone for the first and only time. The attention of a woman who sees clearly and does not apologize for it. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was level, unrushed, pitched to carry without effort. "For those who have not had the pleasure, my name is Audrey Sinclair. I am the founder and managing director of Sinclair Capital Group, as chief executive officer of Apex Meridian Holdings." She let that sentence finish in the room. She did not rush to fill the silence. She let every person present absorb what they had just heard at their own pace. Let the implications land in whatever order made sense to them individually. Richard Tate was nodding slightly. He had known. He had been in the legal briefings. He had spent the last 3 weeks preparing the documentation for exactly this moment. Harper Reynolds had gone very still, her pen motionless above her notepad. Harper was running calculations, salary structure, reporting lines, budget authority, the entire operational hierarchy of the company she thought she understood, now reshuffling itself in real time inside her head. Margot Duval was smiling. It was a small smile, private and controlled. The smile of a woman who had watched Audrey Sinclair be diminished in public 4 months ago and had filed that moment away as important. Now she understood why it had been important. The woman who had stood silent while her husband called her work a little consulting thing was standing at the head of the table, and the power structure Margot thought she understood had just inverted. Nathan Perry looked like he was about to be sick. Simone was looking at Grant. Grant had not moved. He was still standing at the front of the room with the presentation remote in his hand, and his face had gone through 3 distinct expressions in the space of 5 seconds. Confusion, recognition, and then something harder to name. A kind of cognitive dissonance that happens when the fixed architecture of your reality is suddenly revealed to have been a temporary stage set all along. "Audrey," he said. His voice came out wrong. Too familiar. Too casual. The voice you use when you are trying to reassert control over a situation by pretending the situation is not what it obviously is. Audrey turned to him with the same polite attention she might give a colleague she did not know well. "Mr. Holloway," she said. "Thank you for warming up the room. You can sit down now." The Mr. Holloway landed like a blade between ribs. Clean, precise, designed to draw a boundary in public that clarified exactly what their relationship was in this context. Not husband and wife, not partners. Executive and employee. Grant opened his mouth, closed it. His hand tightened on the remote. "I was in the middle of a presentation," he said. "I know. I have a copy of your slides. I've reviewed them." She opened her portfolio, removed a document, and set it on the table. "We'll return to them in a moment. But first, I'd like to make sure everyone in this room understands the transition that has taken place over the past 3 months, because it appears not everyone received the memo." She glanced at Grant when she said, "Not everyone." It was not hostile. It was simply factual, the way you state an obvious gap in communication that needs to be addressed. Grant sat down. He did not choose to sit down. His legs made the decision for him. The way your body sometimes acts on its own when your conscious mind is still trying to process information that does not fit into any category it recognizes. He sat in the third chair from the left, the chair he always sat in. His chair. Except it was not his chair anymore. Nothing in this room was his anymore. He just had not understood that until approximately 40 seconds ago. Simone sat down beside him. Her hands were in her lap. She was gripping her pen so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She was staring at the table in front of her, with the intense focus of a person who is trying very hard not to look at the woman standing at the head of the room, because looking at her would mean processing something Simone was not ready to process. Audrey remained standing. She did not need to sit to command the room. Standing communicated something sitting could not, that she was not settled, not passive, not waiting for permission. She was in motion, and everyone else in the room was going to follow that motion or be left behind. Sinclair Capital Group acquired a controlling stake in Apex Meridian 18 months ago, she said. The transition was structured to be as seamless as possible. Existing leadership remained in place. Day-to-day operations continued without disruption. But as of October 1st, all major strategic decisions, all financial restructuring, and all executive appointments run through my office. She looked around the table, making brief, direct eye contact with each board member in turn. That includes this presentation. She picked up the document she had placed on the table. It was Grant's presentation deck. Printed, annotated in red pen, with handwritten notes in the margins. Mr. Holloway's projections for Southeast Asia market entry are ambitious. They are also, unfortunately, based on outdated data, selectively sourced comps, and at least 3 material misrepresentations that I would like to address before we proceed any further. Grant's jaw tightened. He looked like a man who had just been told the ground beneath him was not ground at all, but a sheet of glass, and it was cracking. I reviewed the numbers, he said. His voice was controlled, but there was an edge in it now. The edge of a man who is being challenged in public and does not know how to de-escalate without losing face. Those projections are solid. I stand by them. I'm sure you do, Audrey said. There was no sarcasm in her tone, just acknowledgement. But standing by a number does not make the number accurate. Let's start with the exchange rate. She flipped to page 8 of the deck. Your entry cost estimate for Vietnam is $42 million. That figure is based on a conversion rate for the Vietnamese dong that was accurate in Q3 of last year. As of last week, the dong has depreciated by 8.2% against the dollar. At current rates, the entry cost is not $42 million. It is $49.4 million. She looked up from the document, directly at Grant. Which exchange rate did you use, Mr. Holloway? The room went silent. Grant did not answer immediately. He was calculating. Not the math, the politics. How to respond to this in a way that did not make him look incompetent, dishonest, or both. Simone was staring at the table. She knew which exchange rate they had used. She had pulled that data. She had questioned it. She had been told to use Q3. She had used Q3. Her chest felt tight. She could not breathe properly. She kept thinking, he told me to use Q3. He said the board doesn't check exchange rates. He said this is how it works at the highest level. Audrey waited. She did not fill the silence. She let it expand until the lack of an answer became its own kind of answer. Finally, Grant said, the projections were built using the best available data at the time. The best available data at the time was last week's rates, Audrey said. They are publicly accessible. They are updated daily. You used Q3 rates because Q3 rates gave you the number you wanted to present. That is not analysis. That is storytelling. Harper Reynolds inhaled sharply. She wrote something on her notepad and underlined it twice. Audrey turned to the next page. The second issue is the 30% cost reduction figure you cited for media operations restructuring. You attributed that number to an industry benchmark study. Which study? Grant hesitated. It's a composite figure, drawn from several sources. Name one. He could not. Because the number had not come from a study. It had come from a leaked internal memo from a competitor. A memo that had been publicly discredited 6 months ago, when the competitor's CFO was forced to retract the projections it contained. Simone had found that memo. She had flagged it as potentially useful context. Grant had taken the number, stripped it of attribution, and presented it as verified industry data. Audrey did not wait for him to scramble for an answer. The 30% figure appears to have originated from a memo leaked from Orion Media Group in March of last year, she said. That memo was retracted in September after Orion's board determined the projections were unsupportable. The actual industry benchmark for restructuring costs in comparable media operations is between 12 and 18%. Your number is not a benchmark. It is an outlier that was disavowed by the company that produced it. She set the document down. I could continue. There are 5 additional data points in this presentation that do not survive contact with verification, but I think the pattern is clear. She looked at Grant. Not with anger, not with triumph, with the flat, clinical attention of a surgeon identifying the problem. You built a compelling narrative, Mr. Holloway. The slides are polished, the delivery is confident, but the foundation is fabricated, and fabricated foundations collapse. Grant's face had gone pale. Not with shame, not yet, with the specific pale rigidity of a man whose internal defense systems are activating, whose mind is searching frantically for the counter-argument, the procedural objection, the escape route that will let him reframe this as a misunderstanding rather than an exposure. He found none, because Audrey had not left him one. Simone was no longer looking at the table. She was looking at her hands that had pulled the exchange rate data, her hands that had found the Orion memo, her hands that had typed the numbers into the slides because Grant had told her to, and she had believed that Grant told me to was the same thing as this is correct. She thought about the blue dress. She thought about the mornings she had woken up early to practice what she would say in meetings. She thought about the 3 years she had spent believing she was learning how to operate at the executive level. She thought, I was not learning. I was just helping him lie better. Her hands were shaking. Audrey walked slowly around the table, not pacing, moving with purpose. She stopped beside Margot Duval's chair. Margot, you've been running operations for 6 years. When you reviewed these projections, what was your assessment? Margot looked up at Audrey, then across the table at Grant, then back at Audrey. I was not asked to review them, Margot said carefully. Why not? Mr. Holloway indicated the presentation was finalized and did not require operational input. Audrey nodded. She turned to Harper Reynolds. Harper, as finance director, were you asked to verify the Southeast Asia cost projections? Harper shook her head. No. I was told the numbers had been verified externally. By whom? Harper glanced at Grant. I was not given a source. Audrey returned to the head of the table. She did not sit. She placed both hands on the back of her chair and looked at the room with an expression that was not disappointment. Disappointment implied expectations that had been unmet. This was something colder. Assessment. Here is what is going to happen, she said. This presentation will not be moving forward. The Southeast Asia expansion will be reevaluated using accurate data and realistic timelines. The media restructuring proposal will be scrapped entirely and rebuilt from operational realities rather than aspirational fiction. She paused. And Mr. Holloway, you will not be leading either project. Grant stood up. Fast. Too fast. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. You cannot do this, he said. His voice was louder now, strained. I have been with this company for 10 years. I built half the strategies we are currently running. You cannot walk in here after 3 months and dismantle everything I have constructed based on a few data discrepancies that... I can, Audrey said. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. Because I own this company, and because those are not discrepancies. They are lies. The word hung in the air like a verdict. Grant stared at her, his wife. The woman he had told 12 hours ago that she was nothing. The woman he had diminished at dinner parties, ignored in hallways, erased from every meaningful context of his professional life. The woman who had just dismantled his career in front of his entire team, using nothing but accurate data and the kind of strategic precision you only develop by spending years preparing for a single moment. He tried one more time. Audrey, he quietly now, almost pleading. We can talk about this privately. You don't need to do this here. Not like this. She looked at him with an expression he would remember for the rest of his life. Not hatred, not satisfaction, just clarity. The look of a woman who has made a decision and is standing on the far side of it, unreachable. Yes, I do, she said. Because you did this here. You lied here. You took credit here. You built your authority in rooms like this, in front of people like this. And now they need to see what that authority was actually built on. She opened her portfolio one more time and removed another document. This one was sealed. These are the revised organizational charts for Apex Meridian, effective immediately. Nathan Perry will be taking over as Interim Director of Strategic Planning. Margot Duval will lead the media restructuring under her operational purview. Harper Reynolds will have direct budget authority for all expansion projects. She set the document on the table. Mr. Holloway, you will remain with the company in a senior advisory capacity. Your salary will be adjusted to reflect the scope of your new role. Your direct reports will be reassigned, and your office will be relocated to the 39th floor, 2 floors down. In corporate geography, that was not a lateral move. That was exile. Grant did not speak. He looked at the document. He looked at the faces around the table, his colleagues, his former subordinates, the people who had spent years watching him operate and who were now watching him be systematically disassembled. He looked at Simone. Simone was looking at the door. Audrey followed his gaze. She looked at Simone for the first time since entering the room. Really looked at her. Saw the blue dress, the careful hair, the notepad full of Grant's talking points, the specific posture of a woman who had walked into this room, believing she was on the side that was winning. Miss Avery, Audrey said. Simone flinched at the sound of her own name. Yes? Audrey's tone was not cruel. It was not kind either. It was simply direct, the way you speak to someone when you are stating facts that need to be stated. The exchange rate data and the Orion memo, those were your research, correct? Simone's throat closed. She forced herself to nod. And when you found the updated exchange rates, did you bring them to Mr. Holloway's attention? Another nod. Smaller this time. What did he tell you? Simone opened her mouth. Closed it. She looked at Grant. Grant was staring at the table now, his hands flat against the wood, his face rigid. He told me to use Q3, Simone said. Her voice was barely audible. Audrey nodded slowly. And you did. It was not a question. It was not even an accusation. It was just an acknowledgement of what had happened. And somehow that made it worse than any accusation could have been. Simone felt something crack open inside her chest. Not anger, not shame. Something underneath both of those. The cold, vertiginous understanding that she had spent 3 years building her career on a man who had used her intelligence to make his lies more convincing. And she had let him, because she had wanted to believe that proximity to his success was the same thing as her own. She stood up. She did not plan to stand. Her body simply made the decision. She picked up her notepad. She looked at Grant one more time, at the man she had believed was mentoring her, the man whose bed she had slept in, whose lies she had proofread, whose future she had thought she was investing in. She said nothing. She walked out of the conference room. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. Nobody stopped her. Nobody called her back. Grant sat frozen in his chair. Audrey returned to her seat. She sat down for the first time since entering the room. Now, she said, looking at the remaining faces around the table. Let's talk about what accurate expansion into Southeast Asia actually looks like. And for the next 90 minutes, Audrey Sinclair rebuilt the strategy Grant Holloway had just destroyed, using real data, verified sources, and the kind of operational clarity that comes from someone who has spent 3 years studying a company's weaknesses, while everyone inside it congratulated themselves on their strengths. The board took notes. They asked questions. They received answers that were precise, sourced, and honest, and Grant Holloway sat in his chair in silence, watching his wife run the meeting he had believed was his, in the company he had believed was his, with the authority he had spent 10 years pretending to possess, while she quietly built the real version of it from scratch. When the meeting ended, people filed out quietly. Harper Reynolds paused beside Audrey's chair. "That was overdue," she said softly. Audrey nodded. "Yes, it was." Margot Duval stopped on her way out. She did not say anything. She just looked at Audrey with an expression that conveyed, in a single glance, everything she had been thinking for 4 months since that dinner party. Finally, Nathan Perry was the last to leave. He looked back once at Grant, still sitting motionless in his chair, and then walked out with the particular relief of a man who has been waiting for something terrible to happen, and is grateful it has finally arrived so he can stop waiting. The room emptied. Grant and Audrey were alone. Grant looked at his wife, his CEO, his career with the precision of a surgeon and the inevitability of gravity. "How long?" he asked. His voice was hoarse. "How long have you been planning this?" Audrey closed her portfolio. She stood. She looked at him with the same clear, direct attention she had used 18 months ago when she made the decision to acquire Apex Meridian. When she had realized her marriage was not failing, it had already failed, and the only question left was what she would build in the space it left behind. 3 years, she said. She walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. "You told me I was nothing, Grant. You said it last night. You have said versions of it for longer than that. And you were wrong." She opened the door. "I built this despite you," she said. "Not because of you. Not even in response to you. Despite you. While you were building presentations on fabricated data, I was building an actual company. While you were taking credit for work other people did, I was doing work nobody could take credit for because it was mine from the ground up." She looked at him one last time. "The most dangerous thing anyone ever did to me was underestimate me, and the most powerful thing I ever did was refuse to do it to myself." She walked out. The door closed. Grant sat alone in the conference room on the 41st floor, in the chair he had always considered his, looking at the presentation slides still frozen on the screen at the front of the room. $42 million. Entry cost. Vietnam expansion. Southeast Asia strategy. Numbers that had sounded so confident 11 minutes ago. Numbers that were wrong. He had known they were wrong. He had chosen them anyway, because wrong numbers that sounded right were more useful than right numbers that required explanation. And now he was sitting in an empty room, 2 floors away from exile, with a career that had just collapsed and a marriage that had ended long before he noticed it was ending. He sat there for 11 minutes. Then he stood, picked up his portfolio, and walked out. The presentation slides stayed frozen on the screen. No but 5, 2 women. Lieve Simone made it to the elevator before her hands started shaking. She pressed the button for the ground floor. She watched the numbers descend, 41, 40, 39, and with each floor, the architecture of her last 3 years collapsed a little further. She had thought she was building a career. She had been building someone else's lie. The elevator doors opened on the 37th floor. A woman in her 50s stepped in, glanced at Simone, registered the expression on her face, and immediately looked away with the practiced discretion of someone who has worked in corporate environments long enough to recognize the aftermath of something significant. Simone stared at her reflection in the polished steel doors. The blue dress looked wrong now. Not wrong in fit or style, wrong in meaning. She had worn it because Grant asked her to. She had chosen the necklace, practiced her posture, rehearsed her answers in the mirror at 5:30 this morning, all in service of a presentation that was never going to succeed because it was built on numbers that were never real. And she had helped build them. The elevator reached the lobby. Simone walked out into the marble atrium of Sterling Tower and kept walking, past the security desk, past the coffee stand where she usually stopped every morning, past the revolving doors, and out onto the sidewalk where the October morning was bright and cold and completely indifferent to the fact that her entire professional identity had just shattered. She walked 3 blocks before she stopped. She stood on the corner of Michigan Avenue and Monroe, surrounded by people moving with purpose toward destinations they believed mattered, and she pulled out her phone. Grant's last text was still there. Perfect. Blue dress, as requested. Today is ours. Today is ours. She stared at those 3 words until they stopped looking like words and became just shapes on a screen. Then she blocked his number. Not with rage, not with ceremony, just a quick sequence of taps, block contact, confirm, and the architecture of their entire relationship reduced to a setting in her phone that she would never need to think about again. She stood there holding the phone, waiting to feel something definitive. Relief, grief, anger. What she felt instead was clarity. Cold, uncomfortable, undeniable clarity. She had been smart enough to do the work. She had not been experienced enough to recognize when her intelligence was being used against her. And the difference between those 2 things was the difference between building a career and building someone else's shield. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Maya. How did the big presentation go? Simone stared at the message. She had told Maya about today. She had described it as a turning point. The morning Grant would show the new CEO what he was capable of, and by extension, what she was capable of, because she was his partner, his collaborator, the person he trusted with his most important work. She started typing a response, deleted it, started again, deleted again. Finally, she typed, "It did not go the way I expected. Can we talk tonight?" Maya replied immediately, "Of course, my place, 7. I will cook." Simone put the phone away. She walked to the L station. She rode the train to her apartment in silence, surrounded by strangers whose lives were continuing in whatever direction they had been pointed before this morning, while hers had just been forcibly rerouted. She unlocked her apartment door, the apartment she had rented 3 years ago because it was close to Sterling Tower, because being close to Grant's office felt like being close to the center of something important. It looked different now. Smaller. The furniture she had chosen to impress him on the rare occasions he visited. The books on the shelf she had bought because he mentioned them. The coffee table with the industry journals she read so she could keep up with conversations he wanted to have. She had decorated this apartment for a man who had just let her walk out of a conference room without saying a word. She sat down on the couch. She did not cry. She felt like she should cry, like crying was the appropriate emotional response to what had just happened. But tears required a kind of surprise, a sense that something unexpected had occurred. And as Simone sat in her apartment in the blue dress, looking at the furniture and the books and the careful architecture of a life she had built around someone else's trajectory, she realized that what she felt was not surprise. It was recognition. She had known. Not consciously. Not in any way she could have articulated if someone had asked her directly. But at some subterranean level, in the part of herself she had been working very hard not to listen to, she had known. She had known when she found the Sinclair Trust document and Grant dismissed it as old family money. She had known when she flagged the exchange rate discrepancy and he told her to use Q3. She had known 7 months ago at that holiday reception when she shook Audrey's hand and saw the way Audrey looked at her, not with judgment, not with hostility, but with the clear, steady attention of a woman who sees exactly what is happening and does not need to say it out loud. Simone had known, and she had chosen not to know, because not knowing let her keep moving forward in the direction she was already moving, and changing direction would have required admitting that the last 3 years had been built on a foundation that could not hold weight. Now the foundation had collapsed, and she was sitting in the rubble, and the only question left was what she was going to build in the space it left behind. She stood up. She walked to her closet. She took off the blue dress, hung it in the back where she would not have to look at it, and put on jeans and a sweater that she had bought for herself, that nobody had requested. That meant nothing, except that they were comfortable. She sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. She pulled up the email she had drafted and deleted 6 times over the last 8 months. The email to Professor Angela Torres at Northwestern, the woman who had offered Simone a spot in the graduate program in organizational ethics 2 years ago. The spot Simone had turned down because Grant had told her she was learning more in the real world than she would ever learn in a classroom. The real world, where men like Grant built presentations on false data and called it strategy. She read the draft one more time. Then she rewrote it. Professor Torres, 2 years ago you offered me a place in your program. I declined because I believed I was learning what I needed to learn through professional experience. I was wrong. Or more accurately, I was learning, but I was learning the wrong things from the wrong people. I would like to know if there is still a path back. If the answer is no, I understand. But if the answer is yes, I am ready now in a way I was not ready then. I know what it looks like when intelligence is weaponized. I know what it feels like to be complicit in something I did not fully understand I was participating in. And I would like to spend the next 2 years learning how to recognize those patterns before I step into them again. Sincerely, Simone Avery. She read it twice. Then she sent it before she could talk herself out of sending it. The email left her inbox with a soft whoosh. Simone closed the laptop. She sat in the quiet of her apartment and felt, for the first time in 3 years, like she was standing in a space that belonged to her. Not to Grant. Not to the version of herself she had been performing for Grant. Just her. It felt strange, unfurnished, like a room with nothing in it yet. But it was hers. 14 blocks away, in the private office on the 42nd floor of Sterling Tower, Audrey Sinclair sat across from Patricia Reeves, her attorney. Patricia had been reviewing the restructuring documents for 90 minutes. She looked up from the last page and set it down with the particular care of someone handling something that could alter lives. This is airtight, Patricia said. If he contests any of it, he loses. If he tries to claim constructive dismissal, he loses. If he tries to argue that you used inside knowledge from the marriage to structure the acquisition, he loses. Because Sinclair Capital Group was operating entirely independently of any information you had access to as his spouse. I know, Audrey said. You really did build this separately. I told you I did. Patricia nodded slowly. I believed you. I just did not fully understand the scope until I saw it executed. You did not just prepare for this meeting, Audrey. You prepared for the 10 years of litigation that could follow it. And you closed every avenue before he even knew the avenues existed. Audrey did not smile. She never smiled when people praised the thoroughness of her strategic planning. Thoroughness was not a personality trait. It was a survival skill she had developed, because the alternative was leaving gaps that men like Grant could exploit. What about the personal side? Patricia asked carefully. Audrey reached into her desk drawer and removed the envelope. The divorce papers. She slid them across the desk. Patricia opened the envelope, scanned the first page, and looked up with an expression that was equal parts admiration and concern. You are not asking for anything. I am asking for the dissolution of the marriage. That is what I want. Audrey, you are entitled to. I am entitled to exactly what I have already taken. My independence, my company, my name. I do not need his money. I do not need his property. I do not need anything from Grant Holloway, except his signature on that document. and his absence from my life going forward. Patricia set the papers down. She looked at Audrey with the expression of a woman who had spent 23 years practicing family law and had seen every possible configuration of marital collapse, and who recognized when she was looking at something rare. "This is the cleanest exit I have ever drawn up," Patricia said quietly. "Most people cannot leave a marriage this way. They are too angry, or too wounded, or too entangled financially. You are walking out with nothing but what you built yourself, and you are leaving him with nothing but what he actually earned." "Which is significantly less than he thought," Audrey said. "Which is significantly less than he thought," Patricia agreed. Audrey stood. She walked to the window. From the 42nd floor, the city spread out in all directions. Clean grids, purposeful architecture, systems that worked, because someone had designed them to work. She had built a company the same way, with intention, with precision, with the understanding that if you wanted something to last, you did not build it on lies or shortcuts, or the assumption that nobody would check your work. You built it to be checked. And you built it so well that checking it only revealed how solid it was. "When will you deliver the papers?" Patricia asked. "Tonight," Audrey said. "After the office clears. I will go to the apartment one last time. I will give him the envelope, and then I will leave. Do you want me there?" "No. This is not a negotiation. It is a notification." Patricia nodded. She gathered the documents, slid them back into her briefcase, and stood. "For what it is worth," she said, "I have represented a lot of women leaving a lot of marriages. Most of them leave wounded. You are leaving whole." Audrey turned from the window. "I was always whole, Patricia. He just could not see it." Patricia smiled. "No, he could not." She left. Audrey stood alone in her office, looking at the city, and allowed herself one moment, just one, to feel the weight of what she had just done. She had walked into a conference room and dismantled her husband's career in front of his colleagues. She had exposed his lies with the precision of a surgeon. She had restructured the company he believed was his kingdom and removed him from any position of meaningful authority. And she had done all of it without raising her voice, without losing control, without once descending into the kind of vindictive cruelty that would have let him reframe this as her fault. She had simply told the truth, and the truth had been enough. She picked up her phone and typed a message to Leo. "Clear my schedule for tonight after 6. I need 2 hours." Leo replied, "Done. Do you need a car?" Audrey hesitated. Then she typed, "No, I will drive myself." She wanted to be alone for this. The final conversation. The envelope. The moment when 14 years of marriage officially became documentation instead of a relationship. She put the phone down. She returned to the window. And for the first time in 3 years, Audrey Sinclair allowed herself to imagine what her life would look like on the other side of this. Not the life where her achievements had to be hidden, because acknowledging them would have disrupted the fragile fiction that Grant was the only person in their marriage who mattered professionally. A different life. One where the work she did and the woman she was existed in the same room at the same time. One where she could walk into any building in this city with her name on the door and not have to pretend it was someone else's name. She was 43 years old. She had spent 14 years married to a man who could not see her. She had spent 3 of those years building something that could not be unseen. Now it was built. And it was hers. She sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And for the first time in 3 years, she could do it in. The envelope Grant Holloway drove home at 6:47 p.m. with both hands on the steering wheel and the radio off. He had spent the 6 hours since the meeting in the conference room on the 41st floor, sitting at his desk, staring at his email, not reading any of it. His assistant had knocked twice. He had not answered. Nathan Perry had texted him at 2:15, "Let me know if you need anything." Grant had not replied. He had replayed the meeting in his head 43 times. Each replay began at the same moment, the sound of heels in the hallway, and ended at the same place. I built this despite you. Despite you. Not because of you, not even in response to you. Despite. The word was a scalpel. It separated him from everything she had accomplished with surgical precision, leaving him standing alone on one side of the cut with nothing in his hands. He parked in the underground garage. He sat in the car for 4 minutes. Then he took the elevator to the 47th floor and walked into the apartment. Audrey was sitting at the dining room table. Not in the guest bedroom, not hidden away. Sitting at the dining room table with a single envelope in front of her, in the charcoal suit she had worn to the meeting, her hands folded and her posture straight. She had been waiting for him. "Sit down, Grant." He sat, not because she told him to, because he had been standing all day, and his legs were exhausted, and the chair was there, and he no longer had the energy to perform resistance. She slid the envelope across the table. He looked at it. He did not open it. He already knew what it was. "When did you have these drawn up?" 9 months ago. 9 months. He repeated it like a man converting currency, trying to understand the value of a number in a system he did not recognize. 9 months. While he had been going to work, giving presentations, sleeping with Simone, living his life with the assumption that the ground beneath him was solid, she had been preparing the legal architecture of his removal. "I am not asking for alimony," Audrey said. "I am not asking for property division beyond what I brought into the marriage, which is documented. I am not asking for anything that belongs to you." "Because nothing belongs to me," he said flatly. "That is not true. Your salary, your savings, your personal assets, those are yours. This apartment is jointly owned. I am willing to let you keep it." He looked at her with an expression she had not seen before. Not anger, not the practiced superiority she had grown accustomed to over 14 years. Something rawer. Something that looked, for the first time, like actual confusion. "I don't understand," he said. "I don't understand how you did this. Any of it. The company, the acquisition, all of it. We lived in the same apartment. We slept in the same building. How did I not see any of this?" Audrey looked at him. And in that moment, she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not sympathy exactly, but a distant, anthropological interest in the architecture of this with another person for 14 years, and never once looked closely enough to see what was actually there. "You did not see it," she said quietly, "because you were not looking." He opened his mouth, closed it. "You stopped looking at me a long time ago, Grant. I do not know exactly when. Year 4, maybe. Year 5. At some point, you decided you already knew everything about me that was worth knowing, and you stopped updating that information. You locked me into a version, the wife, the background, the woman with a little consulting thing. And every time the real version of me contradicted that picture, you dismissed the contradiction instead of updating the picture." She paused. "That is not just a failure of attention. It is a failure of imagination. You could not imagine that I was capable of this. And because you could not imagine it, you could not see it, even when it was happening in the room next to yours." Grant stared at the envelope. "Was any of it real?" he asked. "The marriage. Were any of the years real?" "All of them were real," Audrey said. "The early ones were even good. But real and good are not the same thing, and the fact that something was once real does not obligate you to keep living inside it after it stops being true." She stood. "Sign the papers or don't. My attorney's information is on the last page. If you contest, you will lose. Not because the terms are unfair, they are more than fair, but because I have been preparing for the possibility that you would contest since the day I had them drafted. Every contingency is covered. Every argument you could make has already been anticipated and addressed." She picked up her bag from the counter. A bag she had packed that morning, before the meeting, before the boardroom, before the moment she walked through a door and changed the trajectory of 3 lives. The bag contained her laptop, her phone charger, a change of clothes, and a photograph she had taken from the guest bedroom desk. A picture of herself at 27, the year before she married Grant, standing in front of the first office she ever rented. A 200 square foot room above a dry cleaner with one window and a desk she had found at a thrift store. She did not need the photograph. She just wanted it. It reminded her of the woman she had been before she started making herself smaller to fit inside someone else's definition of what she should be. She walked to the door. "Goodbye, Grant." He did not respond. She opened the door. She did not look back. She stepped into the hallway and pulled the door closed behind her with a sound that was neither loud nor soft, just final. She took the elevator down. She got into her car. She drove to the hotel where she had booked a suite 3 weeks ago, because Audrey Sinclair did not make exits without knowing exactly where she was going next. She checked in. She set down her bag. She stood at the window of her suite and looked at the same city she had looked at from her office 6 hours ago. The same grids, the same architecture, the same systems designed by people who understood that if you wanted something to last, you built it right. She allowed herself 5 minutes. 5 minutes to feel the weight of 14 years ending. 5 minutes to grieve, not for the marriage as it was, but for the marriage as it might have been. In another version of the story, if Grant had been the man she thought she was marrying. Then she set a timer on her phone. 5 minutes. Starting now. She closed her eyes. She let it move through her. The accumulated residue of 14 years of diminishment. Of being made small in public and invisible in private. Of lying awake at 4:30 in the morning doing work that mattered, while the man in the next room slept soundly, in the certainty that nothing she did could possibly matter as much as what he did. The timer went off. She opened her eyes. She picked up her phone. She called Leo. "Leo, tomorrow morning. I want a staff meeting at 8. Full leadership team. We are going to rebuild the Southeast Asia strategy from the ground up, and I want it done in 6 weeks." "Understood, Miss Sinclair." And Leo, "Book the large conference room. The one on 42. The one with the view?" "Yes. The one with the view." She hung up. She brushed her teeth. She changed into the clothes from her bag. She set her alarm for 4:30. She went to bed. And for the first time in 3 years, she slept without the hours. The next 3 days moved at different speeds for different people. For Grant Holloway, they moved slowly. Each hour had the particular density of time passing in a room where nothing is happening, except the gradual, irreversible recalibration of everything you thought you knew about your own life. Day 1. Grant woke alone in the apartment. He made coffee in the machine Audrey had bought. He sat at the counter where she used to sit. He looked at the guest bedroom door, which was open for the first time in months. The room behind it empty. The desk cleared. The closet bare. She had taken almost nothing. That was what struck him. In a marriage that had lasted 14 years, in an apartment filled with accumulated objects and furniture, and she had taken almost nothing. Because almost nothing in this apartment was hers. She had built her life somewhere else, somewhere he had never bothered to look. His phone buzzed. Nathan Perry. Board meeting rescheduled for Thursday. New organizational structure is being distributed today. HR wants to discuss your transition to the advisory role. Grant stared at the words, advisory role. 2 words that meant, you are no longer in charge of anything. He typed, fine. Then deleted it. Typed, I need to discuss this with Audrey directly. Then deleted that too because Audrey was not Audrey anymore. She was Ms. Sinclair. She was his CEO, and CEOs did not discuss personnel transitions with the personnel being transitioned. He typed, acknowledged. He set the phone down. He sat in the apartment for 6 hours. He did not eat. He did not watch television. He did not call anyone. He sat with the envelope on the counter and felt, for the first time in his adult life, the specific paralysis of a man who has lost not just his position, but his narrative, the story he told himself about who he was and why he mattered. At 8 p.m., he called his mother. Dorothy Holloway was 71 years old, a retired school principal who lived in a house in Evanston that she had paid for herself over 30 years, and who had never once in her life needed a man to validate her professional competence. She had met Audrey twice and had liked her immediately, with the instinctive recognition of one self-sufficient woman meeting another. "Mom, Grant, are you all right? You sound terrible." Audrey left. Silence on the line. Not the silence of shock. The silence of a woman who is not surprised and is deciding how much of that lack of surprise to reveal. "What did you do to that woman?" Dorothy said. Not what happened. Not are you okay. Not I'm sorry. What did you do? "Mom, I asked you a question, Grant. There were problems. At work. I know about her company, Grant. She told me about it 2 years ago." The sentence landed like a physical blow. He actually leaned back in his chair. "She told you?" "She told me. We have lunch twice a year. We have since the year you got married. She did not ask me to keep it secret. She simply told me, and I did not bring it up with you because it was the fact that you did not already know told me everything I needed to know about how much attention you were paying to your wife." Grant could not speak. "I like Audrey," Dorothy said. "I have always liked Audrey. She is the kind of woman who builds things quietly and does not need applause. You are the kind of man who needs applause so badly that you forgot to notice the building going up next door." "Mom, you asked me what happened. I'm telling you what happened. You underestimated someone who was smarter and more patient than you, and she did not punish you for it. She simply outgrew you. Those are different things, and I want you to understand the difference." Grant closed his eyes. "Is there anything I can do?" "Yes. Sign the papers. Do not make this ugly. You have done enough." The call ended. Grant set the phone on the counter beside the envelope he had not yet opened. He opened it at 11 p.m. He read every page. He read the terms. Fair, precise, structured with the same meticulous attention to detail that Audrey applied to everything she built. No punitive clauses. No financial aggression. Just a clean separation, drawn with the hand of a woman who wanted nothing from him except to be free of him. He signed at 11:47. He set the signed papers on the counter. He went to bed. He did not sleep. Day 2. Simone Avery woke in her apartment at 7 a.m. She had slept 9 hours, the longest she had slept in months, the deep, dreamless sleep of a person whose body has decided to process something enormous by shutting down completely and rebooting. She checked her email. Professor Torres had replied. "Ms. Avery, 2 years is not too long. I remember your application well. You had one of the strongest analytical profiles I had seen, and I was disappointed when you declined. The January cohort has 2 remaining seats. If you are serious about returning, please submit the enclosed supplementary application by November 15th. There is one essay question I want you to pay particular attention to. Describe a professional situation in which you observed or participated in an ethical failure. What did you learn, and what would you do differently?" I suspect you will have something meaningful to write. Warmly, Angela Torres Simone read the email 3 times. The essay question sat in front of her like a mirror. Describe a professional situation in which you observed or participated in an ethical failure. She had participated. Not observed. Participated. She had pulled the data. She had been told to use the wrong number. She had used it. She had been complicit. That word, complicit, had been sitting in her chest since yesterday morning, and she had been circling it the way you circle a bruise, touching it lightly to see how much it hurt. It hurt a lot. She opened a new document on her laptop and began to write. Not the essay. Not yet. Just notes. A list of everything she had done over 3 years that she had categorized as learning, and now needed to recategorize as something else. The list was longer than she expected. She wrote for 2 hours. When she finished, she had 4 pages of single-spaced notes and a much clearer understanding of the difference between a mentor who teaches you to see the truth and a man who teaches you to help him hide it. One of those relationships leaves you more capable than when you entered it. The other just leaves you complicit. She saved the document. She closed the laptop. She got dressed. Jeans, sweater, sneakers, no blue dress, no pendant, no costume, and went to the coffee shop on the corner to think about what she wanted to build now that she was no longer building someone else's lie. Day 2. Grant went to the office. He rode the elevator to the 41st floor out of habit, then remembered and pressed 39. The doors opened onto an open-plan workspace with fluorescent lighting in a window, no leather chair that swiveled toward the view he had spent 10 years believing he had earned. He sat at an empty desk. A laptop was waiting for him. A small printed card read, Grant Holloway, Senior Advisor, Strategic Consulting. He looked at the card for a long time. He opened the laptop. His email had been restructured. He no longer had access to executive correspondence. His calendar had been cleared of all leadership meetings. The only appointment remaining was a one-on-one with Kevin Muir, the new VP of Strategy, a man 15 years younger than Grant who had been hired by Audrey 2 weeks ago and who Grant had never met. He went to the meeting. Kevin was polite, professional, and unimpressed. He spoke to Grant the way you speak to a contractor you have inherited from a previous administration, with courtesy, but without deference. I have reviewed your past work, Kevin said. There is strong material here. There is also significant cleanup needed. I would like you to start with the Southeast Asia file. Rebuild it from scratch. Real numbers. Verified sources. No shortcuts. Grant opened his mouth to object, to explain, to contextualize, to perform the kind of executive reframing that had been his primary professional skill for a decade. Kevin held up one hand. Real numbers, he repeated. Take as long as you need to get them right. Grant closed his mouth. He went back to his desk on the 39th floor. He opened the Southeast Asia file. He looked at the numbers he had fabricated. The Q3 exchange rate, the discredited benchmark, the composite figures drawn from nowhere. And for the first time, he saw them clearly. Not as projections, not as strategy, as lies. He had always known they were lies, but he had filed that knowledge in a part of his mind labeled, How Things Work at This Level, the same label he had used to justify the affair, the dismissiveness toward Audrey, the systematic avoidance of any information that might require him to adjust his self-image. Now that label was peeling off, and underneath it was nothing but the bare surface of what he had actually done. He deleted the file. He opened a blank spreadsheet. He began again. Day 3. 3 parallel scenes. 3 people. 3 mornings. Audrey Sinclair sat in the conference room on the 42nd floor of Sterling Tower, the one with the view. 8 members of her leadership team were seated around the table. Leo sat to her right with a tablet and a calm expression. Margot Duval sat across from her with a stack of operational reports she had been preparing since the day she watched Audrey dismantle Grant's presentation and understood that the company she worked for was about to be run by someone who actually knew what she was doing. Audrey opened the meeting. 6 weeks, she said. That is our timeline for the revised Southeast Asia strategy. Real data, conservative projections, operational input from every division. Margot, you are leading the cost analysis. Harper, you have budget authority. Nathan, I want you coordinating with our partners in Ho Chi Minh City. And Nathan, this time we are using current exchange rates. Nathan smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in 3 days. Simone Avery sat in her apartment with the supplementary application open on her laptop. She had been staring at the essay question for 40 minutes. Describe a professional situation in which you observed or participated in an ethical failure. What did you learn? And what would you do differently? She began to type. For 3 years, I worked closely with a senior executive who I believed was mentoring me. During that time, I helped prepare financial projections that I now understand contained material misrepresentations. I was aware of certain discrepancies. I raised them once and was told to proceed as directed. I did not raise them again. I want to be precise about what I learned, because the lesson is not simple. I did not learn that I was incapable of doing good work. I was capable. The analysis I produced was technically competent. What I learned was that technical competence without ethical independence is not a skill. It is a tool that can be pointed in any direction by whoever is holding it. I was the tool. Someone else was holding me. What I would do differently is everything. But what I would do first is ask a question I never asked during those 3 years. Whose interests am I actually serving? If the answer is not mine, and not the organization's and not the truth's, then I am not learning. I am being used. She read it back. It was honest. It was uncomfortable. It was the most truthful thing she had written in 3 years. She submitted the application. Grant Holloway sat at his desk on the 39th floor with a blank spreadsheet in front of him. The fluorescent lights hummed. The open plan office buzzed with the mundane activity of people doing their jobs without the need for applause or performance. He typed a number into cell A1, the current exchange rate for the Vietnamese dong. Not the Q3 number, not the convenient number. The real one. It was a small thing. A single data point in a spreadsheet that would eventually contain hundreds. But it was accurate. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Grant Holloway was building something on a foundation that could actually hold weight. He did not know if it would be enough. He did not know if anything he built from this point forward would ever equal what he had lost. He did not know if the real numbers would produce the kind of impressive, confident, room-commanding presentation he was accustomed to delivering. But they would be real. And that, he was beginning to understand, was the only material that lasted. The auditorium at the Drake Hotel held 300 people. On the morning of April 15th, all 300 seats were full. The event was called Forward Built, a conference organized by the Chicago Women's Business Alliance for female founders and executives. The keynote speaker was listed in the program as Audrey Sinclair, CEO of Sinclair Capital Group and Apex Meridian Holdings. Audrey stood backstage with a glass of water and a note card she did not need. She had memorized her remarks 3 days ago. The note card was a habit from her early speaking days, when she had been so nervous before presentations that she needed the physical anchor of paper in her hand to stop her fingers from shaking. Her fingers did not shake anymore. Leo appeared at her elbow. Full house. Press row is packed, and there is someone in the back row I thought you should know about. Who? Simone Avery. Audrey paused. She processed the name. She set down her water. Is she here for the conference? Her university program is a co-sponsor. Several graduate students are attending as part of a course on organizational leadership. Audrey nodded slowly. She did not ask for more information. She did not need it. All right, she said. Let's begin. She walked on stage. The applause was immediate and sustained, the kind of reception that happens when an audience has been waiting for someone, and the waiting has built anticipation into something that sounds, when it finally releases, like a physical force. Audrey stood at the podium. She waited for the applause to finish. She did not rush it. She let the room settle into the particular quality of silence that precedes something important. I spent 14 years being underestimated, she said. No preamble. No thank yous. No warm-up. I do not say that for sympathy. I say it because I want to be honest about the timeline. 14 years is a long time to be invisible. It is a long time to do work that nobody sees, to build something that nobody acknowledges, to stand in rooms full of people who have decided, before you open your mouth, that you are not the most important person in the conversation. She paused. But I want to tell you something about those 14 years that I did not understand while I was living them. I understand it now. She looked out at the audience. 300 faces. Women in their 20s, their 30s, their 50s, their 60s. Women who had started companies, lost companies, rebuilt companies, been told they were too ambitious or not ambitious enough, or ambitious in the wrong way. Being underestimated is not a disadvantage. It is a building permit. When nobody is watching you, nobody is interfering with you. When nobody believes you are capable, nobody tries to stop you. When the people around you have decided that you are irrelevant, they stop paying attention. And when people stop paying attention, you can build anything. She let that land. I built a company while my husband told dinner guests I had a little consulting thing. I built a $400 million portfolio while the man I was married to did not know the name of my firm. I acquired the company he worked for while he was too busy fabricating data to notice that the ownership structure had changed. A murmur moved through the room. Not shock, recognition. The particular sound an audience makes when someone on stage is saying something they have felt but never heard articulated. I am not telling you this to humiliate him. His humiliation is his own project. I am telling you this because I want every woman in this room to hear something clearly. She leaned forward slightly. The most dangerous thing anyone ever did to me was underestimate me, and the most powerful thing I ever did was refuse to do it to myself. The room was silent for one full second. Then the applause started again, and this time it did not stop for a long time. In the back row, Simone Avery sat with a notebook open on her lap. She had not planned to attend this specific keynote. She had registered for the conference because Professor Torres required all second semester students to attend at least 2 industry events per quarter, and Forward Built was on the approved list. She had not checked the speaker lineup in advance. She had walked in, found a seat in the back, opened her notebook, and then looked up at the stage and seen Audrey Sinclair. Her first instinct was to leave. Her second instinct, the one she listened to, was to stay. She sat through the entire keynote. She took notes, not performative notes, not the kind of note-taking she had done in Grant's meetings, where the purpose was to look attentive rather than to learn. Real notes. The kind you take when someone is saying something you need to remember. When Audrey said, "The most dangerous thing anyone ever did to me was underestimate me," Simone wrote something in the margin of her notebook. "The most dangerous thing I ever did was let someone else define my competence." She underlined it. Then, she underlined it again. The keynote ended. The audience stood. Audrey walked off stage to a cluster of women who wanted to speak with her. Founders, executives, young professionals, all of them drawn toward the specific gravity of a woman who had done something remarkable and was willing to talk about it honestly. Simone watched from her seat in the back row. She watched Audrey answer questions with patience and precision. She watched the way Audrey listened, really listened, with her full attention. The way she had listened at that holiday party 7 months ago when she shook Simone's hand and looked at her with that clear, unsettling directness. Simone thought about going backstage. She thought about introducing herself, about saying something. What? What do you say to the woman whose husband you slept with, whose career you inadvertently helped undermine, whose marriage you participated in dismantling? I'm sorry? Thank you? Neither felt adequate. Both felt presumptuous, and Simone understood, with the clarity she had been developing over 6 months of graduate school and therapy, and the slow, painful work of rebuilding an identity that did not depend on someone else's validation, she understood that this moment was not about her. She did not need Audrey's forgiveness. She did not need Audrey's acknowledgement. She did not need anything from Audrey Sinclair. At all. She just needed to see something. She needed to see a woman who had been diminished and dismissed and systematically erased from every context that mattered, stand on a stage and speak with the authority of someone who had built something real. She needed to see that it was possible. Now she had seen it. Simone closed her notebook. She put on her jacket. She stood up and walked out of the auditorium through the side exit, past the coffee stations and the networking tables, and the women exchanging business cards. She did not look back. She walked out into the April afternoon, warmer now than it had been in October, the city softening into spring. And she kept walking. She had a paper due Friday. She had a study group at 6. She had a life that she was building from scratch, with real materials, on a foundation that belonged to her. It was not impressive yet. It was small and uncertain, and full of gaps she did not know how to fill. Her savings were almost gone. Her apartment was smaller than the one she had rented when she was with Grant, a studio now, near campus, with a desk by the window and bookshelves she had assembled herself. She ate cheap meals. She took the L everywhere. She did not own a blue dress anymore. But everything in that studio was hers. Every book on those shelves was one she had chosen to read. Every assignment she turned in was work she had done honestly. And every morning she woke up without the low, persistent hum of complicity that had been the background noise of her life for 3 years. She had not realized how loud that noise was until it stopped. Simone walked to the L station. She swiped her card. Sheet 9. What remains 1 year after the boardroom? 3 lives. 3 trajectories. 3 versions of what happens when the architecture collapses and you have to decide what to build with what is left. Audrey Sinclair sat in her office on the 42nd floor of Sterling Tower at 7:15 a.m. The sun was coming up over the lake, throwing long gold lines across her desk. Her laptop was open to the quarterly report for the Bennett Initiative, the executive mentorship program she had launched 4 months ago, designed to provide operational training and seed funding to women building companies without institutional support. She had named it after her mother's maiden name. Claire Bennett, a woman who had raised 2 daughters alone, who had worked double shifts at a hospital for 20 years, who had died at 61 with no savings and no recognition and no understanding of how much of herself she had given to a world that never gave anything back. The initiative was not charity. It was infrastructure. 12 women in the first cohort, 67 applications for the second, a waiting list that grew every week. Audrey reviewed the applications with the same attention she applied to acquisition targets and financial restructuring. She was looking for a specific quality, not just intelligence, not just ambition, but the particular combination of capability and invisibility that she recognized because she had lived inside it. Women who were doing the work, women who were not being seen, women who were building anyway. She closed the laptop at 8 a.m. She had a board meeting at 9. The Southeast Asia expansion, the real one, built on verified data and conservative projections, had cleared final approval 2 weeks ago. Operations were scheduled to begin in Ho Chi Minh City in June. Margot Duval was leading the implementation. Harper Reynolds had restructured the budget. Nathan Perry had coordinated the partnerships. The team that Audrey had assembled after Grant's removal was producing work that was better than anything the company had delivered in a decade. And they were doing it without fabrication, without shortcuts, and without a single person in any room needing to be the loudest voice. Audrey picked up her coffee, black, no sugar, the same way she had been drinking it since she was 23, and looked out the window. She was not happy. She was not unhappy. She was something more durable than either of those states. She was settled. She was standing on ground she had built herself, and it held her weight completely. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago. Grant had signed without contest. The process had been clean, efficient, and completely devoid of the emotional violence that accompanies most marital dissolutions. Not because they had achieved some kind of mature peace, but because Audrey had structured the terms so precisely that there was nothing left to fight about. She had not spoken to Grant since the night she left the apartment. She did not miss him. She did not hate him. She had processed Grant Holloway the way she processed any failed investment, acknowledged the loss, identified the lessons, and redirected the capital toward something with a better return. The lesson was simple. Never build your life inside someone else's story. Build your own story. Build it so well that when people finally look up and notice it, there is nothing left to do but acknowledge what is already there. She finished her coffee. She went to her meeting. Simone Avery sat in the Northwestern Library at 7:15 a.m. with her laptop open and her thesis outline spread across the desk in front of her. The thesis was titled Institutional Complicity and the Architecture of Corporate Deception, a framework for ethical accountability in knowledge transfer relationships. Professor Torres had called it the strongest thesis proposal she had reviewed in 3 years. Simone had spent 6 months writing it. 6 months of interviews, research, case studies, and the particular kind of intellectual work that happens when you take your own worst experience and transform it from a source of shame into a source of understanding. She was not writing about Grant. Not specifically. She was writing about the systems that make people like Grant possible, the institutional structures that reward confident deception over honest analysis, that promote men who perform competence over women who practice it, that create environments where intelligent people can be weaponized against their own interests without recognizing what is happening until the weapon has already been fired. She had interviewed 37 women for the thesis. Executives, analysts, associates, interns. Women who had been in versions of her situation, who had worked closely with powerful men, who had been told they were being mentored when they were being managed, who had contributed real skill and received in return the illusion of advancement. Every interview had followed a similar pattern. The women described the same trajectory: entry, investment, gradual complicity, sudden clarity. The same realization, arriving at different times but always arriving: I was not learning. I was being used. Simone had documented the pattern. She had given it a framework. She had turned her private shame into a structural analysis that could help other women recognize the architecture of exploitation before they were standing inside it. That transformation, from wound to understanding, from victimhood to expertise, was the hardest thing she had ever done. Harder than leaving Grant. Harder than sending the email to Professor Torres. Harder than the 6 months of therapy where she had to sit in a room and say out loud to another human being exactly what she had participated in and exactly how she had justified it to herself. But she had done it, and the work was good. Not good because it made her feel better. Good because it was true. Good because it was honest. Good because it was built on a foundation that could withstand scrutiny. And Simone Avery was done building things that fell apart when someone checked the math. She typed for 2 hours. At 9:15 a.m., her phone buzzed. Her sister Maya. Dinner tonight? I found a new place near your campus. My treat. Simone smiled. Maya had been the first person she told the whole truth to. The first person she had called after the boardroom. The person who had cooked dinner for her that night in October and listened without judgment, and then said, very quietly, I knew something was wrong. I just did not know what. I am glad you told me. They had been closer in the last 6 months than they had been in years. The closeness was different from what they had before. Not, but the deliberate closeness of two adults who had decided to be honest with each other and were willing to do the work that honesty required. Simone texted back, yes. See you at 7. She put the phone down. She returned to her thesis. She had work to do. Grant Holloway sat at his desk on the 39th floor of Sterling Tower at 7:15 a.m. The desk was smaller than his old desk. The chair did not swivel. The view from his section of the floor was a wall of windows facing another building, not the lake. He had been in this position for 12 months. Senior advisor. No direct reports, no presentations, no rooms to command, just a desk, a laptop, and a job that consisted entirely of producing honest analysis that other people would review and verify. He had resisted it at first. Not openly. He had signed the papers, accepted the demotion, shown up every day, but internally, in the constant grinding friction of a man whose self-image does not match his circumstances. For the first 3 months, he had carried the specific bitterness of someone who believes he has been treated unfairly, who frames his downfall as a result of other people's choices rather than his own. Then, somewhere around month 4, something had shifted. It was not dramatic. It was not a single moment of revelation. It was more like a door opening slowly, in a room he had kept locked for years. The room where the version of himself that he had been performing lived alongside the version of himself that actually existed. The performing version was the one who had given the presentation, the one who used Q3 exchange rates and discredited benchmarks and made them sound like strategy. The one who had cheated on his wife and called it the way things are at this level. The one who had stood in front of rooms and commanded them with the specific confidence of a man who does not know the difference between being impressive and being honest. The actual version was the one sitting at this desk. The actual version was not impressive. He was competent. He was experienced. He knew how to read a market and structure a financial model and identify operational inefficiencies. But without the performance, without the polish, the narrative, the carefully constructed authority that ran on charm rather than accuracy, he was just a man with skills that were useful, but not exceptional. That was a hard thing to learn about yourself at 47. But he was learning it. Kevin Muir had reviewed his last 3 reports without revision. Kevin had said, during their most recent one-on-one, "This is good work, Grant. Keep going. Not brilliant work. Not transformative work. Just good." A year ago, good would have been an insult. Now it was the most honest assessment he had received in a decade, and he found that he preferred it to the applause. He opened his laptop. He had a report due by Friday. Real numbers. Verified sources. No shortcuts. He began to type. 3 people. 3 desks. 3 mornings. No intersection. No reconciliation. No grand reunion where everyone forgives each other and learns a collective lesson and walks into the sunset together. Just 3 people, in the same city, at the same hour, building separate things on separate foundations. One had built an empire by refusing to be invisible. One was building an expertise by refusing to be complicit. One was building, slowly and without applause, the habit of honesty. The city moved around them the way cities always move, indifferent, continuous, full of people making choices they will not understand until later. Mr. 10. Building. 12 months after the boardroom, on a Tuesday morning in October, Audrey Sinclair walked into Sterling Tower at 7 a.m. She walked through the lobby she had walked through a year ago on the morning everything changed. Same marble, same security desk, same revolving doors. But a year ago, she had walked in carrying the weight of a secret, the accumulated pressure of 3 years of hidden work, hidden capacity, hidden selfhood. Now she carried nothing but her bag and her coffee. The security guard nodded. "Good morning, Miss Sinclair." "Good morning, James." She had learned his name on her second day as CEO. She had learned every name. Not because it was strategic, though it was, but because she had spent 14 years being the person whose name nobody used, and she understood what it felt like to be treated as furniture. She took the elevator to the 42nd floor. The doors opened onto the executive suite she had redesigned 4 months ago. The old decor, dark wood, leather, the particular aesthetic of corporate masculinity that communicates power through heaviness, had been replaced with something cleaner. Light walls, open sight lines, a conference table made of glass that did not hide anything underneath it. Leo was already at his desk. He looked up. "The Bennett Initiative applications are in. 112 for Cohort 3. "Good. I will review them this afternoon. And you have a message from Dorothy Holloway." Audrey paused. "From Dorothy? She asked me to tell you that she is proud of you. She said you would know what that means." Audrey stood very still for a moment. Then she nodded. Thank you, Leo. She walked into her office. She set down her bag. She stood at the window. The city stretched out in front of her. The grids, the architecture, the systems built by people who understood that durable things require honest foundations. She had built her company on an honest foundation. She had built her freedom on an honest foundation. And she was building something now that she had not anticipated when she started this journey 3 years ago. A legacy. Not the kind of legacy that fits in a trophy case or a press release. The kind that exists in other people's choices. In the 12 women from the first Bennett Initiative cohort, who were now running their own companies, in the 67 applicants for Cohort 2, in the 112 for Cohort 3, in every woman who had ever been told she was nothing, and had decided, quietly and without permission, to prove otherwise. Audrey sat down at her desk. She opened her laptop. She had a company to run, a strategy to implement, a future to build. She did not look backward. She never had. 3 miles away, Simone Avery walked into the Northwestern Campus Library at 7 a.m. She swiped her student ID. She climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, where her usual desk waited by the window, the desk she had claimed on her first day of the program, and had occupied almost every morning since. She set down her bag. She opened her laptop. The thesis was due in 2 weeks. 243 pages. 37 interviews, one framework that took the worst thing she had ever participated in and transformed it into something that might prevent other women from participating in the same thing. She looked at the dedication page, which she had written last night. For every woman who was smart enough to do the work, but not yet experienced enough to recognize when her intelligence was being used against her. You were not weak. You were targeted. And when you finally saw it, you left. That is not failure. That is the beginning. She closed the dedication page. She was not sure she would keep it. It felt exposed. It felt like standing on a stage and admitting something she was still learning how to admit. But it was honest. And Simone was done building things that were not honest. She opened them and began to type. She typed steadily, without stopping, for 2 hours. When she looked up, the library had filled around her. Students, researchers, faculty. People doing the work that mattered to them, in the spaces they had chosen, at the pace they had set for themselves. Simone looked at the screen. She read the last paragraph she had written. The women interviewed for this study did not fail. The institutions that employed them failed to create environments where intelligence could not be exploited, where mentorship was distinguishable from manipulation, where the question, whose interests am I serving, could be asked without professional consequence. Systemic change begins with structural honesty. It begins with organizations willing to examine not just the outcomes they produce, but the methods by which those outcomes are achieved. And it begins with individuals, particularly individuals who have been inside the machine, willing to describe, with precision and without self-protection, exactly how the machine works. This thesis is that description. She sat back. She read it again. It was good. Not good because it was brilliant or groundbreaking or the kind of work that would make headlines. Good because it was true. Good because it was built on the only foundation Simone trusted anymore. The foundation of her own honest analysis, verified against reality, accountable to no one's narrative but the facts. She saved the document. She closed the laptop. She picked up her phone and texted Maya. Thesis is almost done. 2 more weeks. Maya replied, I am taking you to dinner when you finish. The expensive place. And I am paying. Do not argue. Simone smiled. She put the phone away. She opened the laptop again. She had work to do. 5 miles south, Grant Holloway sat at his desk on the 39th floor and submitted a report to Kevin Muir. The report was 87 pages. It covered the Southeast Asia market entry from every angle, cost analysis, regulatory framework, competitive landscape, risk assessment. Every number was verified. Every source was cited. Every projection was conservative, honest, and defensible. It was the best work Grant had done in years. Not because he had suddenly become more talented. He had always been talented. He had always had the skills, the experience, the intellectual capacity to produce excellent work. What he had lacked, what he had substituted with performance and fabrication, and the specific confidence of a man who believed charisma was an acceptable replacement for accuracy, was the willingness to do the work honestly. Honest work was slower. It was less dramatic. It did not produce the kind of numbers that made executives sit forward in their chairs. It produced the kind of numbers that made executives nod slowly and say, "That seems right." That seems right was not applause, but it was real. Kevin reviewed the report that afternoon and sent a 2-line response. "This is solid. Sending to the leadership team for implementation review." "Good work, Grant." Grant read the message. He did not feel triumph. He did not feel the surge of validation that used to power his days. He felt something quieter and less portable. He felt like a man who was beginning, slowly and without certainty, to understand the difference between building something impressive and building something true. He did not know if understanding that difference was enough to redeem the years he had spent on the wrong side of it. He did not know if the people he had hurt, his wife, his colleagues, the young woman in the blue dress who had walked out of a conference room carrying 3 years of misplaced trust, would ever see him as anything other than the man who had lied. He did not know if he deserved to be seen differently. But he was doing the work, the real work, the honest work. And for now, that was all he knew how to do. He closed his laptop. He went home to an apartment that was too large for one person. He ate dinner alone. He washed his own dishes for the 365th day in a row. He went to bed. Tomorrow he would wake up and go to his desk on the 39th floor and open his laptop and do the work again. Real numbers. Verified sources. No shortcuts. That was not a story anyone would tell at a dinner party. It was not the kind of narrative that commanded rooms or impressed strangers, or made the person living it feel like the most important figure in any given scene. But it was true. And true, Grant was learning, was the only material that lasted. 3 people. 3 trajectories. 3 versions of what it means to build something after the collapse. One built an empire. One built an understanding. One built, slowly and without applause, the habit of being honest. And the city held all of them, indifferent, continuous, and full of the particular light that comes in October, when the air is cold enough to see your breath, and the morning is clear enough to see everything. Everything. Even the things you spent years refusing to look at. Even those. If this story satisfies something in you, stories like this go up every day. The ones about women who were told they were nothing and built everything anyway. The ones about men who finally sat still long enough to learn what they had broken. The ones about the moment someone walks into a room and changes the architecture of every life inside it. Me, what would you have done the night before you walked into that boardroom? I will read every single one.